a long way from any of our sources of power. Let's look at the map, and we'll see that Afghanistan is a landlocked country. It's several hundred miles from the sea in the closest approach. It's got mountains over 7,000 meters, over 20,000 feet high in one corner. It's got a very difficult topography. It's peopled by various tribal groups. It's had a centuries-long tradition of defying invasion and fighting against invaders. It defeated the British twice in the 19th century. It turned back the Russian invasion in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And so it resists foreign encroachments. And it's just a terribly difficult piece of ground and difficult people. But that's not the objective. The objective is international terrorists. Afghanistan is of interest only because we know that the Taliban government in Afghanistan has, to one degree or another, provided support and cover and deniability for Osama bin Laden's network of training camps and perhaps his operational headquarters.
Well, that's not a small matter, though.
It's a very large matter.
Right.
It's a very large matter, but we'd still like to get the terrorist network first. Remember that this is a group that plans operations, and there's probably other operations in plan against us today that we don't know about. The work we're doing to roll up these cells, the pursuit of this activity that occurred against us and the terrorists that we've identified so far in the United States is vital. But we don't know that there aren't other sleeper cells associated with other prospective actions. And so it's vital to take our homeland defense responsibilities very, very seriously. So we don't want to get distracted from that by a months-long foray into very, very difficult terrain. We got to do everything, keep a lot of different balls in the air at once on this operation.
General Clark, I can feel you pushing me away from this line of questioning. As a former enlisted guy, I got to tell you, I'm enjoying a bit pushing a general back a little bit. Yeah. One more question then on this line. Let
me tell you why I want to push a little, if I could,
okay,
Aaron, on this. Because it's a natural thing. America's angry, and people want to strike back at this in the sense of visible, forceful action right away. But we have to depend on our leadership to tell us whether that's the right thing to do and whether it's the wise thing to do. And what we don't want to do is we don't want a public outcry and building expectations that there's some easy, simple military solution that a few cruise missiles or a big 6-month buildup is going to resolve, because this is a much different type of problem. So that's why I'm pushing back a little bit to try to get the full dimensions of the problem in play. And there may well be a place for military action, but it's not the primary thing we're interested in right now.
General, I learned 30 years ago the guy with the scrambled eggs is always right. I'll stop here while I haven't been court-martialed. And I know I'll have other opportunities to try this again. Thank you. It's good to talk to you. Wes Clark, former NATO commander, joins us tonight. You know, you can't resist sometimes those 30 years. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon. A couple of things from Jamie tonight. We saw some it's devastating, I think it's a fair word, pictures of the Pentagon, a look at the Pentagon we hadn't seen before, and he could tell us more about that, and we'll talk about some of the call-ups too. Jamie, it's been a long day for you as well. Good evening.
Good evening, Aaron. What would you like to start with?
Let's start with the pictures, if you...
Well, first of all, the Pentagon released a couple of new pictures of the Pentagon today. First of all, they released some new video that was shot on the day that the attack took place, showing the devastation outside as the facade of the Pentagon collapsed. Now, this happened somewhere about 45 minutes after the plane hit, and what personnel told us here today was what the amazing thing was that the building held as long as it did, and they credit that to reinforced steel that had been put in as part of the renovation campaign. They say that gave some of the people in that section the enough time to get out and save themselves before the building actually collapsed. So they credit some of the procedures and some of the new building techniques they used in the renovation as saving some lives there. The Pentagon also released some video today inside showing the devastation and the damage in there, and that was quite remarkable as well. You could see the desks where people had been doing their work in that wing of the Pentagon, no clue that a fully loaded, fully fueled jetliner was about to crash into them. You could, in this part of the Pentagon, you could still smell some of the jet fuel even days after the fire took place. And it's remarkable to look at some of the windows that were there that had special blast-resistant glass that were able to also mitigate the effects of the explosion. The death toll now stands at 124. It's been lowered twice because it turned out that 2 people who were counted were actually on some of the airliners that were hijacked, DOD employees who were actually on the planes. But they say the death toll would have been much higher had it not been for some of those security precautions.
Jamie, hold the thought for a second, okay? I want to come back to you. Don't leave us, and we'll come back to you and to the pictures. We've just picked up a couple of pieces of information we want to get to you as quickly as we can. Number one, we talked about a material witness the government was looking for right at the top of the program. We've now learned that this would be the second material witness to be taken into custody, has in fact been taken into custody here in New York. And we are also told that the FBI and police agencies are searching now an apartment in Jersey City just across the river and questioning 2 other people. That's going on now, or at least was going on a few moments ago. So this sense of an investigation in motion and making progress, whether you see it as quick progress or creeping progress nevertheless continues here on Saturday night. Jamie, it is difficult, I know, to be interrupted in mid-thought and mid-picture. I apologize, but here we go again.
Well, let me just mention a couple of other things. The Pentagon did say today that they were going to rebuild this section of the Pentagon as quickly as possible, although they say it'll take a couple of years and cost well over $100 million, probably hundreds of millions of dollars by the time they get through. And it's important for the Pentagon officials say for one reason, to show that the Pentagon, which is the symbol of the arsenal of democracy, is going to be put back together. Also, another little important part of symbolism tonight from the Pentagon, we learned tonight that the operation that includes the combat planes flying over the United States, ships at sea along the coastlines, and the U.S. military support for the disaster relief both in New York and Washington has now been given the name Operation Noble Eagle. At this point, that just refers to what the military is doing now in response to the attacks. It doesn't extend to any offensive operation. When that time comes, it may get another name, or this name may be broadened. But again, the Pentagon puts a lot of thought into picking these names to try to communicate what it is they're trying to accomplish. And in this case, with a mission of homeland defense and aid to the homeland, they picked the name Operation Noble Eagle.
And on the reservist question, are the notifications going out? Are men and women getting phone calls or messages, however they do this, that it's time to report?
They are getting notifications as they're beginning to just start to identify units. Most of the notifications have not gone out as they're trying to figure out which units are the most appropriate and whether there are people, units that want to volunteer, or people within those units that want to volunteer. Already, though, some Coast Guard people have been activated in order to increase patrols along the coastline, and some reservists are beginning to get those activations. But the Pentagon stresses that at this point, all of those reservists being called to active duty are to support these 2 missions, either homeland defense or support the civil authorities. There's been no call-up of reservists yet for any offensive military operations.
Jamie, thanks. Jamie McIntyre at the Pentagon for us, giving us a very good look at a very bad scene that went on there on Tuesday. On the subject of a very good look, I'll give you a very good look at the city of New York as it was. We just went to the file today and took some pictures of New York as it was the other day. That would be Monday or so. I'm not sure when these pictures were taken, but that's certainly how the city looked. Those 2 buildings, of course, are those 2 buildings in the center of the Trade Center, the towers of the World Trade Center. As you peer around, it's coming around New York Harbor, and there are the centers, 50,000 people, as you know by now, about where one of those planes hit, right about there as you zoom into the offices, the Statue of Liberty. I stand on this roof a lot when I come to work, and I look out there, and I don't know that I ever really saw the Statue of Liberty, and now I come up here every day, and it's almost the first thing I see when I look out in the harbor during the day. It's a little hard to see at night. Now, today, as we come in, just this watch, yeah, the towers are gone. And the smoke is there, and it is still there tonight, and apparently will be there for some time to come. The landscape of the city, in many ways, literally changed. The Trade Center buildings are in the district of Gerald Nadler. Congressman Nadler is with us to talk a little bit. It's nice to see you. Look out there for a second. What do you see when you look at it? I don't mean literally, I suppose, what do you see, but what do you see?
It's unspeakable. It's unspeakable. I came up here from Washington on Tuesday and came up here by train, and normally the first thing you can see of New York, 20 miles away, is the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, and instead all you saw was a void and a huge column of smoke coming up from where it should have been and going out across the Jersey Shore to the south. And it was a gut-wrenching thing. I just felt violated. Yeah. My city was violated.
And that feeling, I suspect, hasn't changed much over the days. It shifts a little bit, but...
Has not changed. It's still terrible to look at pictures of the way New York looked and the way it looks now. It's a grievous, grievous wound.
You were down there yesterday with the president. I saw you. When you saw it, worse than you imagined, bigger than you imagined?
Well, I had been there on Wednesday also with the mayor extensively. I can't say it's bigger or smaller. It's just awesome to look at. It's just awesome to look at the site, to look at a mound that's maybe 40 feet high and was a 55-story building, the 7 World Trade Center, to look at the wreckage, at the bridges across West Street that led to the World Financial Center. One of them is completely down. The other's pretty intact but hanging attached to nothing. And looking at those two voids where those two towers were, and thinking of all the people who lie buried in that mound of rubble. It's awesome.
Just a couple of sort of odds and end questions. I'm not sure where all this goes. The mayor. You and the mayor are of different parties. You haven't always seen eye to eye. How do you think he's done?
He's done magnificently. I was with him much of the day on Wednesday. I sat in on the operations meeting. He called it a briefing, but it was really an operations and planning meeting where it was the mayor and his commissioners. The governor was there and a couple of people. And I think I was the only person there just watching. And I was awed by the professionalism and the very matter-of-fact way he made the decisions. And I hate to say it, but this is his forte. Crisis is his forte. He's a very good crisis person, and he's done great in holding the city together and in voicing.
Yeah, it's really both elements of that, isn't it? It is literal crisis management, but the guy has been everywhere. He's been accessible. He's been smart in a lot of ways.
There's no question about that.
I mean, whatever your politics, it's really
forget
not
the politics.
issue.
It's irrelevant. He's been fine. More than fine. He's been very, very good at this.
It seems to me that politicians and perhaps journalists too, in times like this, say the expected things. And we've heard the expected things a lot. The city will rebuild, we'll be fine, we'll hang together, all of that. We're a country, I think, of short memories. Do you worry that the nation's attention at some point, not too far away, will turn to something else? There'll be another crisis, another moment.
Well, life goes on, and yes, things do change and people go on. But we will rebuild and so forth. But the fact is, we'll rebuild minus the somewhere between 4,000 and 20,000 people who are dead, and those families and their loved ones are shattered. I know some of those families myself, and they're not going to rebuild. I mean, the children will grow up and have children of their own, but there'll be a void. There'll be a terrible, terrible void, and there's no getting around that, obviously. And we have been awakened. I mean, when I saw that, I was in Washington. And I was about to go to my office at 5 to 9 in the morning when I turned on the TV, saw the World Trade Center burning, heard about a plane, thought immediately of the 1945 collision of an Army bomber into the Empire State Building. And then as I was watching, the second plane came in and hit the second tower, and I said, oh my God, it's a terrorist attack. Yeah. And then I immediately thought, thank God these people didn't have access to nuclear materials. Yeah. Because that's the next problem that we're going to have, and that's a problem that we're ignoring right now. I mean, there's an article on the front page of the New York Times a few weeks ago that because of the expense, the United States is going to abandon a program of, in effect, paying the Russians to give us Soviet weapons-grade plutonium to transform into material non-usable for bombs, so that it doesn't get smuggled onto a black market, so the Iranians or Bin Laden or some other lunatics get a hold of it. And how can we even think of abandoning such programs? I mean, if these people, 5 years from now, similar people had access to a nuclear weapon, do you know what this would be like?
One other thing. I'm old enough to remember this, so you must be old enough to remember this too. We're about the same age. I think you're a little younger, in fact. A headline in the paper at a very different time, but the city was in a very difficult situation. Ford to New York dropped dead, I think was the headline.
I remember the headline.
The city was on the verge of bankruptcy. And the reason I remember it now is that the government, the federal government, has not always been very kind to the city of New York. Do you think the city is going to get what it needs? All that it needs?
I think the city is going to get all that the federal government can do to help it.
Okay.
I do think that. I think President Bush was very good. I participated in the negotiations over the last few days toward changing what was an original proposal by the president for $20 billion, most of which would have gone to the military, some to help rebuild here. And it changed into a $40 billion bill, doubled, with $20 billion earmarked really for reconstruction and for help and for victims. And there was a resistance to that in some quarters in Congress. The president, when asked for $20 billion for New York, immediately said yes. Senators Graham and Nichols tried to turn that around and stop that Thursday night. And I was asked on a radio show today why I thought that some senators wanted to deny New York the help. And all I could say was that Senator Graham did his country the best service he could render it by announcing his retirement.
Congressman, it's nice to talk to you. You leave with a zinger.
Well, thank you. But why indeed would people want to say to a stricken part of the United States that we don't want to give you this help? I don't understand that. But thank God the President of the United States and the vast bulk of people in Congress did not feel that way.
Thanks. It's good to talk to you.
Likewise.
I hope we'll talk again and we'll talk about where this money's coming from and the implications of it all. Thank you. Sit tight for just a moment if you don't mind. Let's go down to Gary Tuchman. Gary, if you've been with us over the last week, many of you have, has been very close to Ground Zero through much of the time. He's still down there tonight. Gary, the activity there this evening.
Well, Aaron, even 4.5 days later, the horror of the scene is still overwhelming. Small fires continue to burn, smelly, acrid smoke continues to billow in the air, and more than 4,900 people are still missing. If you had to put an adjective to the scene up close, a word that would come to mind is hell-like. News media cameras haven't been allowed close to the scene. To Ground Zero for the most part. The police are keeping us away. So we've relied on video from civilians, video from emergency workers, and also video from the U.S. Coast Guard. And one thing you see close up today and tonight are great masses of twisted steel still dominating the landscape. With fires burning in different places, they remove some steel, it provides oxygen, and a fire starts in a new location. It looks like a terrible scene on a fictional planet. There is so much debris there. 22,000 tons have now been removed, according to the mayor of New York. That's 44 million pounds. But it's estimated that there are 600,000 tons there total. So that comes out to a total of 3% that's been removed, and that may even be a generous number. The most important goal right now, this story certainly has lots of ramifications and lots of tentacles, but the most important story right now is trying to recover survivors. The bad news, over the last 3 days, not one survivor has been found, but authorities are saying, and they're not just saying this to make people feel good, they still feel there is potential for people to be alive under the rubble. The World Trade Center had underground space of about 60 or 70 feet below the level of the ground, and they're saying it's possible, but they haven't been able to get to it yet. The fact is 4,972, that is the number of people who are still missing. 159 people are confirmed dead, so this death toll can eventually go to 5,100. You're looking at video of people who are very grateful for the emergency workers who have been on this scene. Right outside the perimeter where we're standing right now, where the public is not allowed, people have gathered to thank emergency workers, to hold signs, to clap for them. It isn't like an organized thing. It's not like people said, come on out at 6 p.m. and thank the people. People have just shown up, and we've seen hundreds of people at these checkpoints thanking the emergency workers. We've also seen people putting up murals throughout the city thanking workers, putting up murals of American flags. And I've seen more flags in New York City today than perhaps I've seen since the nation's bicentennial in 1976. One other thing I want to tell you about 15 minutes ago, a fireman came up to me. He was back there at the scene, and he found in the rubble, among many other things, a small paperweight. And on the paperweight was the character from the funny pages, Ziggy. And on top of Ziggy, the paperweight said, quote, "Don't worry about tomorrow, just try to get through today." The fireman was struck by that tragic irony, as are we. Aaron, back to you.
I think a lot of people think that way. Gary, a couple of quick things perhaps. Is there the missing number, this dreadful 47 plus number? It hasn't changed a lot over a couple of days, leads me to believe at least we're close to a final number of missing. Is that what you're hearing?
There was some fear initially, Aaron, that we could have a death toll close to 10,000 here. That will not be happening. It is felt that it will be fairly close to a 5,000 number, to be frank about it.
It's almost obscene to think that makes you feel better somehow. I remember hearing, I think Tuesday night or Wednesday, that the number might go to 20,000, but it now does look like it's going to be around 5,000, somewhere like that.
You know, it's incredible, Aaron, covering Oklahoma City, 168 people died, a huge number of people. And now here we're talking about a tragedy where you are talking about more than 5,000 people dead. These are incomprehensible numbers. It's just hard to figure.
It is absolutely impossible to get your arms around. Thank you, Gary, for your work tonight. There was, it seems to us at least, a rather significant shift today over at the Armory. The Armory, as I think many of you may know, has been the place where families of the missing have gathered, seeking information about their loved ones. They've been coming there for several days now. Today, what went on there was one of those painful signs that it's been a while and the clock is ticking and hope is running out. Our Michael Oku is there and joins us now with more on that. Michael?
Aaron, I have to tell you, just walking through the city today, there is a tired, weary feeling throughout this entire city. And many people here have felt that they have already shed so many tears. I think over the next coming days, you will undoubtedly start hearing the words and phrases that are so often used at times like this that they have a ring of cliche to them. Return to normalcy, resolution, moving on. And yet there are so many people, possibly tens of thousands of people, connected to close to 5,000 lives that may have been lost that night, whose lives will never be normal again, who may never find resolution. What's happening here is that many of these people, the friends and family of those people who are missing from the World Trade Center attack, come to the Armory here on Lexington Avenue and 26th Street. And as of yesterday, about 3,100 people had walked through those doors, filed through those doors, filled out essentially a seven-page papers that essentially asked for any kind of identifiable information of those people who were missing. Everything from their name, of course, to their hair type, to their blood type, to anything recognizable, to what kind of nail polish they wear. And today, the New York City Health Department announced that a company called LabCorp, they are a Vermont-based company, a very large medical company with over 900 centers around the country, is going to be offering free DNA collections. That is, friends and relatives, specifically relatives, can provide identifiable materials that can be traced through their DNA to this company, and later authorities will ascertain through all kinds of testing the information that may ultimately connect these relatives and identify those people who are missing. They're asking them from everything from hairbrushes to toothbrushes to anything, any item that that might have been used exclusively by that person who is missing. And in fact, right now I am joined by Angela Ciccone, who is missing her godmother. Angela's godmother worked in the World Trade Center, I believe, what was it, Tower number
1.
Tower number 1 up on the 94th floor.
For Marsh McLennan, but it was a division of American Express. And so we're just looking for any information, if they saw her, if she was leaving the building, if she was even in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning. She's a very helpful person. We're sure she would have followed orders and helped someone, and we just need anything.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to give you that number very quickly. It's a number for LabCorp in Vermont. If you have any information that might be able to help them, if you have any information, you want to get to LabCorp and give them DNA, get a DNA collection, they're at 888-933-3627. Back to you, Aaron.
No, not quite yet. Do the number again. I'm writing it down, and you said it faster than I can write it down.
Sure, let's do that again. 888-933-3627.
Thank you, Michael. Surprised me to have to write down a phone number. Thank you very much. It is it's just, you have to have something to match, do a DNA match, and that is why those rescue teams are being so meticulous there. They're looking for anything, it's a bit gruesome, but any identifiable body part remain that they could use in a DNA match, and that's why they're down there literally sometimes on their hands and knees. I'll show you something that's going on. I think it's going on right now. In fact, not too terribly far from here in Little Italy. This would have been the weekend of the Festival of San Gennaro, and it obviously is not a day for a festival in this city. It is a night for a vigil, and it is going on this evening in Little Italy. This is sometimes one of the more raucous late summer festivals in town. But like everything else, it's changed. Look at that face. Little Italy tonight. New York literally began to bury its dead today, and among them, 2 fire officials and 1 chaplain with the fire department. Reverend Michael Judge died early on Tuesday while administering last rites to another firefighter who was carried from the tower seen by other firemen and died shortly thereafter. Richard Blystow covered his funeral today.
Surgery is going to keep news photographer David Handschuh away from some friends' funerals, but this one he wasn't going to miss. Because in the line of duty, he saw a lot of Father Mike Judge, the firefighter's chaplain, who was killed Tuesday while giving last rites to a fireman.
He would hold your hand and you would just feel good. He emanated some form of just positive goodwill that nobody else I've ever met could. By just touching you, by putting his hand on you and giving you a hug, you just floated away happy.
Many of those in the overflow crowd had narrow escapes that day. David Handschuh had 2.
You hear the sound and then the building starts falling down in slow motion. And I'm a photographer. The initial reaction was to raise the camera and take a picture, but something up here said, just run. And in the 20 plus years I've been doing this, I've never once run from anything. But it probably saved my life. The wall of debris that came flying down just picked me up and threw me a block.
One leg shattered, the other torn up. Firemen pulled him to a delicatessen. Another photographer captured that moment, but it wasn't over.
When the second building collapsed, the facade of that building was blown in. We were trapped once again. Using their hands and tools and sheer strength and will, they pushed their way out.
For news photographers, cameramen, reporters, days like that are part of an unwritten contract with life. So too with soldiers, policemen, firemen, which doesn't make it much easier. But the thousands still missing downtown, they didn't sign up for this.
I'm so sorry that so many people lost their lives over this. It's It's not comprehensible. It's not right.
At the end, the photographer pulled out his camera. It may not make much of a picture, but this one's personal. Richard Blystone, CNN, New York.
Well, we like a good picture, that's the truth. And even though our business is moving pictures, we like a good still picture. So one of the things we did today is, with the help of Associated Press, we put together some pictures, not just any pictures. They call themselves New York's bravest, the fire department does.